Good evening. Relax, immerse yourself in this calm atmosphere, and allow yourself to travel through ancient Rome. Imagine yourself walking through the streets of the city, filled with the smells and sounds of life, feeling every movement around you. Gradually, you will be immersed in a world where hygiene and cleanliness did not have the same importance that we attach to these things today. Today we'll be heading to the public Roman baths to learn how the Romans dealt with the dirt and discomfort that was part of their daily lives. We'll be spending time in a world where cleanliness wasn't always as high a priority as it is for us, and where dealing with dirt, heat, and noise became part of the daily routine for many people. Think about how often we enjoy the warmth of a shower or a relaxing moment in the bath these days. But in ancient Rome, this simple habit was very different and much more complex. Let's see how the people of Rome, despite all the difficulties, found ways to maintain their hygiene in the conditions of that time. Focus on these images and allow yourself to relax, immersing yourself in the past. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like it if you're interested, and comment where you are and what time it is. This will help us know who is listening to our stories and from where. Now, let's dive into the world of ancient Roman baths. Ancient Rome was a fascinating and multi-layered society, a city where peace and order were combined with chaos and a constant struggle for survival. Roman streets were filled not only with the noise of merchants and the mechanical sounds of wheels, but also with the aromas that filled the air, from fresh bread, roasted meat, and spicy herbs, to the smell of burning and damp earth, mingling with the smell of human sweat. In this world full of life and events, one of the most important places were the Roman public baths. This is a place where literally every inhabitant of the city could find a corner for rest, purification, and socialization. But despite their importance and often luxurious appearance, the baths of ancient Rome were places where dirt and discomfort were an integral part of the experience. Imagine yourself in this city, where a new sound or smell lurks around every corner. You walk along narrow cobbled streets, listening to the sounds of footsteps and conversations. Suddenly, a large building decorated with stone columns appears in front of you, where life is in full swing and the air is stuffy and humid. This is a public Roman bath, a center of relaxation and social life for the Romans, but also a place where cleanliness and order were far from modern standards. The public baths of Rome were a necessity, a part of the daily life of every Roman. For ordinary people like you, it was a place to wash after a hard day's work, to remove dust and sweat. And for the rich, it was not only a place of purification, but also a real cultural center where Roman politicians, philosophers, and even emperors met. The baths became a center of social activity, a place for meetings and discussions. However, despite their importance, Roman baths were not perfect. For the poor and simple city dwellers like you, the place was uncomfortable and often dirty. When you entered the baths, you immediately felt the humidity and heat that filled the space. The water, which was supposed to cleanse, was often cloudy and poorly filtered. In such an atmosphere, filled with steam and human traffic, it was difficult to find moments of peace. Imagine how difficult it is to breathe from the smell of dampness, from the smell of people sweating in this hot and humid environment. So, if you go to the bathhouse to cleanse yourself after a hard day, you have to go through several stages. First, you enter the apodyterium, the dressing room. Lots of people, loud conversations, and then you leave your clothes and start to feel the warmth and steam in the air. Then you move into the first of the main rooms, the cold pool, or frigidarium. Here you can cool off a little, but the air is still damp and the walls are covered in limescale. You want to go to the tepidarium to feel more comfortable warmth, but on your way to this room, you have to push your way through crowds of people. The water you hope for is also often not as clean as you would like. In these crowded baths, you had to sit next to people who may not care about hygiene as much as you do. The public bath was a place where personal boundaries were often erased, and you could find yourself in the middle of a whole circle of people, each of whom was absorbed in their own affairs. With every step, every movement, more smells are introduced, from damp stone and stale water to mixtures of sweat and dirt. You have to fight for space if you want to enjoy the hot water in the caldarium, the hottest room designed for purification. Here, the air is thick with heat and steam, and people sit sweating, waiting silently for the heat and humidity to wash the last traces of the day from their bodies. Despite all the hardships, this practice becomes a part of your life. Time spent in a public bathhouse is important to you in one way or another. Bathhouses were not only about a place to cleanse the body, but also about social interaction. You, like other people, could meet friends, chat with neighbors, or even solve some small but important issues in this hot and humid space. Here, in these vast spaces, you could forget the harsh realities of work, hunger, and poverty. The bathhouse became a place where you could forget about the stress, if only for a few hours. Perhaps in this place you could feel part of something bigger, part of that great city, part of Roman society. And yet, despite the moments of relief, dirt and discomfort were inevitable companions of the experience. This was the reality of the Roman public baths, places where body and soul were cleansed, but where cleanliness was relative. It was a world in which the struggle against dirt, noise, and crowds became an integral part of everyday life. Now that you've immersed yourself in the ancient Roman bathhouse, let's take a closer look at why the Romans frequented these establishments so often. For many of us, going to the bathhouse may simply be a relaxing or hygienic experience. But for the Romans, public baths were much more than just a place to cleanse the body. They were more than just a visit to a room with hot water. Baths were the center of social life, cultural interaction, and even political negotiations. Imagine yourself walking through dark corridors and entering the main room, a public bath. The noise of human voices gradually increases, and a mixture of humidity and hot steam begins to fill the air. You go to the first pool, a cold frigidarium, where you can relax and cool down a little. The water is cold but refreshing, and you feel how it washes away your fatigue. Here, in this large room, you are not alone. Others join you, but no one stands completely alone. For the Romans, these moments in the bathhouse were more than just physical cleansing. They were a chance to socialize, to relax, and perhaps more importantly, to exchange news and gossip. The bathhouses were a frequent gathering place for both rich and poor Romans. You might talk to coworkers, neighbors, or even bump into someone you knew to discuss the latest happenings in town. Important business and political meetings often took place in Roman baths. Remember that public baths were not just places to cleanse the body, but also centers of social interaction. Noble Romans often held meetings with friends or allies to discuss business, conclude contracts, or even conduct political negotiations. It was a kind of club where everyone could meet on neutral territory and discuss important issues. Understanding that the bathhouse was an important place for sharing information and socializing puts public baths into perspective. Not only did people cleanse themselves, they also exchanged a variety of ideas, built their networks, discussed important events, and perhaps even built careers. For Roman citizens, it was not just a physical process, but an important element of social life that helped strengthen bonds, build trust, and maintain relationships. The importance of baths was not limited to the social aspect. They were also a place to relax after a long day of work. The Romans believed that water treatments promoted relaxation, improved blood circulation, and stress relief. In this regard, baths played a key role in maintaining health and physical well-being, which also influenced their importance. For people who worked in hot workshops or markets, visiting a bath was not only a matter of cleanliness, but also a vital part of recovery. However, despite the widespread use of baths, it is important to note that not all Romans used them in the same way. For the poor and lower classes, baths were often the only available means of maintaining personal hygiene. For wealthy citizens, especially those who had private baths in their homes, public facilities served more for relaxation and socializing than for physical cleansing. As you soak in the atmosphere, the warmth and the smells, you can imagine yourself taking a break between treatments, relaxing in one of the pools. Someone next to you is discussing the news of a new emperor, another perhaps telling a joke about a famous philosopher. This communication is as important an element of the Roman baths as the process of cleansing the body itself. In this sense, the public baths of Rome were more than just a place for water treatments. They were a living and dynamic place where ideas and social connections were exchanged at every turn. It could even be said that Roman public baths became the basis for what we today call public spaces. In these places, like in modern cafes or parks, people gathered to share stories, seek support, and find like-minded people. So, despite all the inconvenience and dirt that was often associated with the baths, they remained an important part of Roman culture and social life. They were a place for relaxation, socializing, but also for the restoration of not only the body, but also the spirit. When we picture Roman public baths, we often conjure up images of luxury and sophistication. Steam, marble walls, mosaic floors, and hot pools for people to bathe in. But the reality, as always, was a little more complicated. Despite all the effort the Romans put into creating these public spaces, hygiene issues were an integral part of life. Immersion in the atmosphere of the Roman baths was not only a physical cleansing, but also a complex process of interaction with dirt. When you enter the bath, the first thing you notice is the thick, humid air. Humidity permeates everything around you, and you feel the steam wrapping around you, filling every corner of the space. The water, although flowing from aqueducts, was not always perfectly clean. Problems with the water supply and water filtration did not give the Romans a guarantee that the water in their baths would be clean. It could be cloudy, and in some places, perhaps even have an unpleasant smell. Imagine stepping into a cold pool, trying to cool down, but feeling the water seem a little thicker than it should. That dirty feeling that can't be completely avoided was something the Romans experienced in every bathhouse. Even though the Romans used aqueduct systems to bring water from the springs, access to clean water was limited, and not all of the water that made it into the bathhouses was crystal clear. In addition, with each new stream of people entering the bathhouse, the quality of the water deteriorated. Public baths were filled with people who could not afford private, secluded baths, and they all shared the same water. When you bathe in the same water with hundreds of other people, there is a chance that some of them may be sick, and the disease can be transmitted through the water. The Romans, although aware of such problems, did not have the means that we have today to completely prevent such risks. In addition to contaminated water, the Romans faced other hygiene problems. For example, the floors in the baths were not always kept clean. The sewage system in Rome was not yet sufficiently developed, and the sewage system in public baths left much to be desired. The floors were slippery and covered in dirt, which caused not only discomfort, but also the risk of injury. Water that flowed from people's bodies mixed with the remains of dirt and sweat, creating an unpleasant mass that had to be cleaned up. But it was not always possible to do so effectively. Dirt, of course, was not the only factor that could lead to illness. In ancient times, doctors knew little about how infections were transmitted from person to person. Epidemics such as plague, cholera, and other diseases spread much faster in crowded places like public baths. Imagine how a crowded room with everyone moving from pool to pool could become a real breeding ground for diseases. Steam, mixed with sweat and dirt, turned the bathhouse into a place where diseases could spread with incredible speed. It is also important to note that baths were not just places for cleansing. They were places where people sat, socialized, exchanged ideas, and sometimes forgot about sanitary norms. The fact is that for the Romans, a bath was more than just a hygienic procedure. It was a place of cultural and social interaction, and to some extent, this justified the dirt and inconvenience they had to deal with. Since the Romans did not fully understand how bacteria or viruses were transmitted through water, they often left hygiene issues on the back burner. Despite all these difficulties, visiting a public bath remained an essential part of life for most Romans. Only a few could afford the privacy and cleanliness of a private bath, while millions of other Romans faced the dirt and dangers of public places every day. This inevitably created some problems, but for most people, going to the bath was an important part of life, and they continued to go there despite all the inconveniences. In the baths, the Romans cleansed themselves not only physically, but also mentally. Despite all the problems such as dirt, smells, and illness, the baths remained an important social institution. It was a place to relax, to forget the difficulties of the day, and for the rich and politically influential, a place to discuss business and exchange important information. Now that we have understood the difficulties that the Romans faced when visiting public baths, let us move on to a closer look at how these baths were constructed. For despite all the problems with hygiene and overcrowding, the architecture of Roman baths was remarkable. They were not only means of maintaining cleanliness, but also amazing engineering structures that served as an important cultural and social center for entire segments of the population. Imagine yourself approaching one of the largest Roman baths. A large stone building stands before you, steam rising from it. The entrance to the bathhouse will likely be grand and welcoming, with tall columns and carved decorations that show traces of ancient Roman craftsmanship. The entrance to the bathhouse will be decorated with statues and frescoes, often depicting gods or scenes from everyday life. This place, even if it was intended for mass use, was a true work of art. As soon as you enter, the first thing that catches your eye is the space. Spacious hallways, wide doors, high ceilings, and majestic walls. Marble, stone, and tiles were made to create an atmosphere that gives the impression of luxury and comfort. Entering such baths, you will immediately feel that you have entered a place that not only cares about physical cleanliness, but also about your sense of grandeur. Public baths in Rome usually included several different rooms, each of which performed its own function. The most important element of the bath's architecture was the system of heating water and air. This was done with the help of a unique system of hypocausts, underground furnaces that heated the air passing under the marble floors. These furnaces worked using hot coals, and the hot air rose under the floors, warming the rooms. Imagine the cool air changing to warm as you walk across marble floors, which, heated by hypocausts, become soft and pleasant for your feet. Roman baths had not one, but several such temperature zones, from cold to warm and hot. Each room had its own role: the frigidarium for cooling, the tepidarium for relaxation, and the caldarium for intensive cleansing and steam treatments. One of the most impressive elements of the architecture of the Roman baths is, of course, the pools. Large baths had several pools, from large cold ones, designed to cool the body, to small but hot ones, in which you could really relax. Imagine yourself entering one of these pools and immersing yourself in hot water. Do you feel how your muscles relax and your body gradually immerses itself in a pleasant hot liquid, soaked in the aromas of oils and herbs? The decor of these baths was no less important. Art was valued in Rome, and the baths were no exception. Mosaics, frescoes, and sculptures were everywhere, not only decorating the room, but also lifting the spirits of those who visited. Mosaics depicting seascapes or mythological creatures often covered the floors and walls. These images were not simply decorative, they also served as a reminder of the divine order and aesthetics that accompanied the Romans in their daily lives. It is also important to note that Roman baths were not just places to cleanse the body, but also important social and cultural institutions. People came here not only for hygiene procedures, but also to relax after a long day of work, meet friends, discuss news, or simply spend time in a comfortable and calm environment. Some baths not only had swimming pools, but also libraries, gyms, and exercise rooms where the Romans could engage in physical activity. In these places, people did gymnastics, played ball, and also practiced physical training, which also shows the importance of health and the body for the Romans. Baths served not only as places for personal purification, but also as cultural centers where one could discuss not only political issues, but also exchange new knowledge, communicate with philosophers, musicians, and poets. In this sense, the architecture of Roman baths was a vital part of Roman social life. When you think about Roman baths, it's important to remember that not all of them were created equal. While the general concept of a bathhouse was similar, Rome's public baths could vary greatly in size, luxury, and target audience. These establishments weren't standardized. They were divided into several categories, depending on who was visiting them and what services they provided. Imagine choosing which bathhouse to visit. If you're a wealthy Roman, you'll likely have the opportunity to visit one of the most luxurious bathhouses, decorated with marble, gold ornaments, and ornate details that highlight your status as an elite. However, if you're a poor artisan or laborer, you may find yourself in a less luxurious bathhouse that doesn't have as many amenities or comfortable seating. While all Roman bathhouses had to provide basic functions like access to water, heat, and humidity, conditions could vary greatly. For the poorer classes like you, the bathhouse was primarily a necessity, not a luxury. You would most likely visit one of the large public bathhouses designed for mass use. These bathhouses, known as thermae, were often crowded, likely to be crowded, and finding a place to yourself would be difficult. Despite this, such bathhouses could offer basic amenities: cold, warm, and hot water, as well as some degree of relaxation from the daily grind. Imagine walking into a bathhouse like this. You immediately feel the hustle and bustle of the surroundings. People talking, laughing, arguing, discussing the news. The person sitting next to you in the pool could be a complete stranger. In these places, interaction was inevitable, and the atmosphere was always social. The spaces might not be as fancy as those in elite bathhouses, but they were still places for meeting and conversation. In such a crowded and noisy place, it was difficult to think only about personal purification. Rather, it was a place where people could take a break from hard work and exchange many ideas. However, the baths reserved for the wealthier classes were quite different. If you were a member of the aristocracy or even the political elite, your baths were much more luxurious. Imagine walking into one of these elite baths, decorated with rare marble and precious stones. The floors are laid with beautiful mosaics, the walls are painted with intricate images, and the whole environment is designed to impress. These baths had more privacy and provided more amenities, such as separate massage rooms, special areas for relaxation, and special rooms for receiving medical treatments. In such baths, Romans could not only relax, but also discuss more serious topics. Rich merchants, high-ranking civil servants, politicians, and military leaders met here, discussing not only everyday affairs, but also important political issues. Local philosophers and poets also often appeared in such places, because the public bath was part of the intellectual and cultural life of Rome. It was a place to make deals, discuss strategies, and establish important connections that could affect the future of Rome. Because the Romans valued cleanliness and physical well-being, these elite baths also often offered special body treatments, such as massages using aromatic oils, thermal treatments, and even sports training. This was not just a bathhouse, but a whole cultural complex that cared for the body and spirit. Thus, Roman public baths were much more diverse than it may seem at first glance. They served both ordinary citizens and the elite, but at the same time, each of them had its own specificity and atmosphere. In this diversity, Roman baths reflected the importance of social and cultural aspects, as well as the depth of relationships between people of different social strata. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the most interesting and specific aspects of Roman hygiene, the use of the strigil. This metal instrument, which was an integral part of the Roman bathing practice, played an important role in the process of cleansing the body. For us today, when we can use soap and sponges, this may seem strange, but for the Romans, the strigil was an essential element of hygiene. Imagine yourself standing in one of the hot rooms, in a steamy atmosphere, with the smell of warm air and humidity. When a servant approaches you with a metal strigil, you can see how other people around you are also using this tool. With it, they clean their skin from dirt, oil, and sweat. The strigil is a kind of metal scraper that was used to scrape off not only dirt from the body, but also excess oil that the Romans used on their skin to protect themselves from the sun and dry air. The strigil became an integral part of the Roman bathing practice, and its use was part of the obligatory ritual of cleansing. After you had a steam bath in the caldarium, the hottest room filled with hot steam, you would move on to the next stage of the procedure, where the strigil became an essential tool for removing sweat and oil from the skin. The Romans did not use soap in the same way we do today. Instead, they used oils and special aromatic substances to help cleanse the skin and keep it moisturized. It may seem strange to us that we can see another person using a strigil, and then the same tool is used to cleanse many other people. But the Romans did not perceive this as something dirty or unacceptable. On the contrary, it was part of their practice of cleansing and caring for the body. For them, it was normal, part of a daily process that accompanied them from a very early age. Picture this scene. You are sitting in a warm room, feeling the hot air relaxing your body. When the attendant approaches you with this metal instrument, you do not feel uncomfortable, but rather, you immerse yourself in this process as if it were something natural. The strigil helps you get rid of the remaining dirt and oil, and you feel how your skin becomes clean and fresh. After this procedure, you can breathe easier, and the atmosphere itself is relaxing. While the strigil was an important tool for cleansing the body, its use also highlights one aspect that differentiated Roman practice from modern hygiene. While we are accustomed to using soap and sponges to cleanse ourselves, the Romans used oils, heat, and the strigil. It was a process that could take some time, and it was not only a hygienic procedure, but also part of a cleansing ritual that often involved social interaction. In Roman baths, the strigil was used not only to cleanse the skin, but also to create an atmosphere of coziness and comfort. It was a symbol of purification, which may have made the Romans feel not only clean on the outside, but also cleansed on the inside. We can draw parallels with modern relaxation procedures such as massages or spa treatments, which serve not only for physical relief, but also for psychological relaxation. Thus, the strigil was not just a tool for fighting dirt. It was part of a daily practice that, despite its peculiarities, carried an important element of care for the body and spirit. The Romans used it not only as a tool for cleansing, but also as a way to relax, immerse themselves in an atmosphere of peace, and cleanse not only their body, but also their mind of worries. The Romans were proud of their engineering achievements, especially in the area of water supply. A system of aqueducts throughout the Roman state provided cities with fresh water, which flowed into public baths, fountains, and homes. However, despite this, the water that the Romans used in their baths was far from always perfectly clean, and problems with water quality were an integral part of their bathing practices. Imagine stepping into one of the pools at a public bathhouse and immediately feeling that the water isn't quite what you'd expect. It's not like the clean, clear water we often see in modern pools. The water in Roman baths could be cloudy, and its quality depended on a variety of factors. The water that reached the baths was often brought in via aqueducts, and while Rome's water supply system was highly sophisticated, the lack of filtration and purification meant that the water could contain impurities. If you were to enter such a bathhouse, you would immediately feel the smell of damp earth and old water filling the space. Even though aqueducts delivered water from mountain springs, it could become contaminated along the way. The technology of the time did not allow for effective filtering of water, and it often brought with it not only dirt, but also microbes that could get into the water, especially in places where it was used repeatedly. Especially in crowded bathhouses, the water quickly became contaminated, as thousands of Romans used the same water at the same time. A bathhouse could contain several pools with different water temperatures, cold, warm, and hot. But despite all the efforts, the water in them was not always fresh. Imagine how, moving from one pool to another, you feel how the water becomes more and more cloudy, and the smell begins to tire you. This lack of cleanliness was not something unusual for the Romans, and they hardly felt such discomfort as we would feel today. In their understanding, water remained an important element of purification, even if it was not nearly as clean as we are used to. But even if the quality of the water in the baths was not always ideal, the Romans did their best to cope. They used a variety of methods to purify the water, although they did not fully understand the mechanisms involved in germs and infections. Some baths had special water filters, as well as systems for pumping and removing waste, which allowed them to maintain at least some minimal water quality. However, all these measures were not enough to guarantee complete safety. Public baths were crowded, and it was impossible to carefully monitor the purity of the water, especially in hot pools, where the water quickly became dirty from sweat, oil, and dirt left by people. Imagine how a body covered with skin, greased with oils and sweat, mixed with water, creating a mass that was not always ideal for health. However, despite these shortcomings, water in Roman baths remained an important element of everyday life. It was not only a place for cleansing the body, but also an important social center. Many Romans took part in this process, and water remained a source of life and purity, albeit with certain limitations. Despite all the problems with the water quality, the Romans continued to use their baths. The problems with the water did not stop them from visiting these places. The bath remained an important part of their lives, a place to cleanse not only the body but also the soul, a place to forget about the difficulties of everyday existence. And although the quality of the water left much to be desired, the idea of purification and relaxation that it provided was so important that the Romans continued to use these public institutions despite all the inconveniences. If you've ever been in a crowded room where the hot air mixes with the flow of people, you're probably familiar with the fact that the feeling of comfort and cleanliness can quickly disappear. Well, in the Roman public baths, the air was filled with exactly these smells, which may be unusual for us, but were an integral part of everyday life for the Romans. Imagine entering one of Rome's great baths. The humidity, the hot air, and the crowds of people busy with their own business all immediately fill your consciousness. You are forced to move through a space filled with odors that are difficult to describe in modern terms. The damp, spicy smell of sweat mingles with the aromas of the herbs and oils that the Romans used to protect themselves from the sun and maintain the beauty of their skin. This smell may not make you feel clean. Instead, it becomes part of the atmosphere that surrounds you. In the bathhouse, as in any crowded place, smells were an inevitable part of life, but in Rome, they were especially pronounced. Everyone from workers to aristocrats used the same spaces, And despite the use of aromatic oils and essential substances, the smells of these treatments were not nearly as fresh and pleasant as we are accustomed to in modern spas. In addition, when the water in the pools became dirty, it added additional unpleasant odors to the atmosphere of the baths. In places where the water was constantly used by many people, the smells of dampness and humidity became almost unbearable. The purity of the water was no guarantee that the air would remain fresh. The smell of wet stones, wet clothes, and human sweat created a not very pleasant atmosphere, especially in those parts of the baths where people spent a long time. The smell became an integral part of life in the Roman baths, and it was not something the Romans tried to get rid of. Instead, it was part of a ritual of purification. Eventually, like the baths themselves, the smells of these places became familiar, and the Romans accepted them as an integral part of the process that helped them feel renewed and purified, despite all the inconveniences. Smells weren't limited to sweat and damp earth. For the Romans, the cleansing process always involved the use of various aromatic oils and mixtures. Oils like olive oil, with the addition of aromatic herbs, were used to soften and moisturize the skin. These oils, in turn, imparted a certain smell that, while pleasant, mixed with the unpleasant odors of sweat and dirt. This particular combination of aromas may have made the Romans feel relaxed and clean, but it may be unusual for us. It is also worth noting that the bathhouse was not only a place for cleansing the body, but also a kind of entertainment institution where people spent time, met with friends, and discussed important issues. In some cases, the smells of the bathhouse could even be associated with the cultural and social norms of the time. It was a place where not only hygiene, but also social interactions played a key role. In a sense, the smells became part of this atmosphere of communication and interaction. However, despite all the inconveniences with the smells, the Romans continued to visit the baths regularly. It was an important part of their lives, and the smells, no matter how unpleasant, could not overshadow all the benefits that visiting a public bath brought. For the Romans, the bath was a place where not only the body was cleansed, but also the spirit was renewed, and the smells of these places became part of this purification. Despite all the inconveniences and hygiene problems we have just described, the Romans continued to use public baths. But, like any crowded place where people spend time together, the bath was an ideal environment for the spread of diseases. In conditions when the Romans did not know about germs and infections, those diseases that could be transmitted through water or air remained a big problem. However, the Romans used several methods to avoid diseases, despite the obvious risks. Imagine being in one of these crowded pools where people are swimming, socializing, sweating, and mingling. Each person immersed in the water brings with them not only water, but also potential dirt and disease. However, the Romans found ways to reduce the risk of infection. One such method was to circulate the water in the baths. In some of the more advanced baths, the water did not stand still, but was constantly flowing, allowing the old water to be replaced with fresher water. However, this was not enough to completely prevent diseases. The Romans did not know about germs and viruses, and even if the water was changed, dirt from the human body or infections could still be transmitted. The bathhouse was not a sterile place, and despite all efforts, diseases still spread. The plague and various infectious diseases often decimated the population, and public baths were one of the main places where they spread. In addition to circulating water, the Romans used other methods to prevent the spread of disease. For example, they tried to keep the bathhouse tidy and clean by regularly cleaning the floors and walls, and using various aromatic herbs and oils to reduce the spread of unpleasant odors and germs. Oils such as olive and bay were used not only for hygienic cleansing, but also to create a protective barrier for the skin. It also imparted a scent, which may have been intended to mask other odors and create a more pleasant atmosphere in the bathhouse. Another interesting way to protect against diseases was through the practice of massage. Many Romans used the bathhouse as a place for massage, which, according to some, could not only relax, but also help remove toxins from the body. Massage, performed using aromatic oils, served as a kind of prevention, allowing the skin and muscles to be cleansed of accumulated toxins and improve blood circulation. However, despite all these measures, visiting the baths was still associated with risks. The Romans could not control all aspects of hygiene, and diseases such as smallpox, plague, and other infections sometimes destroyed entire areas of the city. Public baths became places where such diseases spread very quickly. As thousands of people gathered in one place, socializing, and being in the same space. But despite these risks, the Romans continued to use their baths. The reason is simple. In the conditions of ancient Rome, a bath was not just a place for hygienic procedures. It was a place for communication, for relaxation, for cultural exchange, and even for solving business and political issues. Even if the bath was a source of some health risks, the benefits of visiting these establishments often outweighed the dangers. The Romans were aware of the risks associated with disease, but their public baths remained an important part of life. People who were accustomed to these institutions perceived them as an inevitable and important place for relaxation and socialization. So, despite all the difficulties associated with cleanliness and health, the public baths of Rome remained an integral part of their cultural and social heritage. Public baths in ancient Rome served much more than just a place to cleanse the body. These establishments were real centers of social life, where not only physical procedures took place, but also the exchange of information, communication, meetings with friends, and even business negotiations. When you walk through the space of a bath, you understand that this is a place where all levels of society collide, where people, regardless of their status, meet to discuss the news or just relax. Imagine entering one of these public baths. The noise of voices begins to increase, and you see people moving around you, some in togas, some in simple clothes. But what unites them all is the desire to find peace and rest from worries. In these baths, you could meet rich merchants and politicians, as well as poor artisans and ordinary citizens. The bath was a place where social differences became less important, and everyone, no matter how divided their social status, could spend time together in an atmosphere of relaxation and communication. For the Romans, the bathhouse was more than just a place to cleanse the body. It was a social space, a place where important meetings and negotiations took place every day. Imagine people discussing the latest political news, talking about sports or philosophy, or simply enjoying the company of acquaintances. Friends and colleagues often met in the bathhouse, discussing not only personal matters, but also political or business issues. For wealthy Romans, the public bath was a place to show off their social status. People came here not only to relax, but also to show off their social status in the company of influential people. It was a place for networking, where important issues were discussed, business matters were resolved, and deals were made. Moreover, the bathhouse was also a place for cultural meetings. Philosophers, poets, and scientists often spent time in these places, discussing ideas and new concepts. In the Roman baths, one could meet people whose thoughts and ideas shaped the future of civilization. And although they were surrounded by a hot and humid atmosphere, this did not prevent them from thinking about high ideas and philosophy. The bathhouse was a place where the body could rest and the mind could focus on great questions. However, even for ordinary Romans, the bath was not only a hygienic procedure, but also an important social event. Here they could meet neighbors and colleagues, talk about business and city news. For many poor Romans, the bath was the only place where they could relax, forget about the burden of their daily lives, and feel part of Roman society. For them, visiting a bathhouse became a kind of ritual. Despite all the inconveniences and dirt, these places gave people a chance to forget about the difficulties of the day, relax, and establish contacts. Society in Rome was arranged in such a way that every person, regardless of their status, could find a place in a public bathhouse and feel equal to others for a while. This is not only physical cleansing, but also a kind of cleansing of the soul from worries and troubles. Imagine sitting in a pool surrounded by people just like you. They all came here to forget about their daily lives, to relax and exchange ideas. The baths were a place where everyone could feel part of a large Roman family, regardless of their social status. They became a kind of democratic space where everyone could find time to relax and socialize. Thus, public baths in ancient Rome were not just places for physical cleansing, but important centers of social life, where not only physical but also intellectual energy was exchanged. They were places where people could develop, relax, and build connections that would later influence the development of the Roman Empire. As in any culture, in ancient Rome the bathhouse was surrounded by myths and legends that gave this place a special aura and significance. Even despite all the physical discomfort and dirt that people had to deal with, public baths remained important, not only from a practical point of view, but also in a cultural context. The bathhouse became a symbol of purification, not only of the body, but also of the soul. Imagine entering a bathhouse again. It is surrounded not only by steam and smells, but also by many stories that circulate among the people who came here. Myths about bathhouses were as multi-layered and varied as Rome itself. One of these myths was the legend that it was the gods who gave people the art of bathing. In Roman mythology, the bathhouse was associated with the goddess of hygiene, Hygiea, who was the daughter of Asclepius, the god of medicine. She personified cleanliness and health, and the Romans often used her image as a symbol of the well-being that the bathhouse brought. According to one legend, Hygiea taught the Romans to purify not only their bodies, but also their souls. It was a process of not only physical purification, but also internal renewal. The myth of Hygiea became the basis for the Roman attitude to baths as a place where people not only improved their health, but also found harmony. Thus, the bath in Rome was a place where not only physical, but also spiritual purification took place. For the Romans, the bathhouse was associated with spiritual practice and purification, which began with the water and continued in the shower. Each visit to the bathhouse was a ritual of sorts, and its completion gave a feeling of renewal and rebirth. Myths and legends associated with the bathhouse emphasized the importance of this process for general well-being, both physical and spiritual. The bathhouse became a place where one could gain a new outlook on life, cleanse oneself of problems and worries, and prepare for new beginnings. In addition, myths about the miraculous properties of water used in baths were often told in Roman culture. Some springs and waters heated by hypocausts were believed to have healing properties. People came to these baths believing that hot water or mineral baths could cure illnesses, give strength, and restore youth. Myths about the healing properties of water became popular, and many Romans sought to find such miraculous waters to improve their health. We should not forget the myths that were told among ordinary people. For example, there was a belief that anyone who entered the bathhouse would be able to rid themselves of the shadow of their previous worries. It is noteworthy that such stories were often accompanied by mysterious stories about the purity of the soul or the cleansing of vices. These myths also emphasize the importance of the Roman public bath as a place for spiritual renewal and self-improvement. However, despite the mythological overtones, the Romans were also well aware that the bathhouse was not only a place for social life and spiritual practices, it was also a place for illness and infection, as we have discussed earlier. But in the context of myths, illness was often perceived as something external that could be fought with the help of spiritual strength and purification. And although the myths often idealized the process of purification, in practice the bathhouse was a place where the real fight against dirt and disease was a constant part of everyday life. The myths surrounding the baths gave these places a special magic, creating the idea of them as sacred, divine places of purification. The bath became more than just a physical necessity. It became a ritual that was an integral part of Roman culture and life. Now that we understand the importance of public baths to the Romans, let's take a closer look at the contrast between the elite baths and those frequented by the common people of Rome. This contrast was not only in the level of comfort and luxury, but also in the social significance of these places. Public baths for the poor and elite baths for the wealthy Romans symbolize the difference in social classes, as well as the different approaches to using these facilities. Imagine you're a wealthy Roman who's just left his luxurious villa, where you have your own private bathhouse. This bathhouse probably wasn't something you shared with thousands of other people. Instead, your place to cleanse was personalized, private, and far more luxurious. You didn't have to fight for space in the pool or engage in noisy conversations with other townspeople. Your bathhouses were built to maximize comfort and tranquility rather than functionality, as was the case in public spaces. Elite Roman baths were places not only for physical purification, but also for demonstrating social status. Private baths often included massage areas, gymnastics training rooms, gardens, and even rooms for philosophical discussions. Here, wealthy Romans could not only cleanse their bodies, but also display their power and wealth by surrounding themselves with luxury and opulence. Every detail, from marble columns to exquisite mosaics, was part of a grand show that demonstrated how high a person stood in the hierarchy. But despite all this luxury, the process of cleansing the body remained the same as in the public baths: water, massages, and strigil. However, in the elite baths, it was done with much more comfort and attention to detail. The cleansing process, which was obligatory for everyone, became much more personalized and refined. Imagine enjoying not only hot waters, but also the aromas of oils, massages, fresh herbs, and soft light coming through large windows. Now, imagine yourself as a poor Roman forced to visit one of the large, crowded public baths. In these baths, you will encounter a very different reality. The spaces were more functional than luxurious, and they served thousands of people, all sharing the same water. Although the architecture of these public baths could also be impressive, the atmosphere was very different. Noise, smells, crowds of people, and a lack of space for personal privacy. Public baths were places where you could not only take a steam bath, but also socialize with other people. For the poor and working class like you, the bathhouse was likely the only place available to cleanse the body. It was a place to meet friends, neighbors, or even co-workers. These baths served not only for hygiene, but also as an important social space, where news and rumors spread like wildfire. In addition, for poor Romans, the baths became something almost necessary. After a hard day's work, when the body was tired and covered in dirt, the public bath served not only as a place of purification, but also as an opportunity for rest and socialization. However, due to overcrowding, dirt, and inconvenience, public baths often left a lot of dissatisfaction. However, despite these inconveniences, for most Romans, going to the baths was an important part of their lives, and it was a place where everyone could find some solace and some renewal. These contrasts in bath use highlight the social inequalities of Rome. While the bath was a luxury and a sign of status for wealthy Romans, for the poor, it was an essential element of everyday life, essential to their physical well-being. And despite the different conditions, ultimately for all Romans, the bath remained a symbol of health, renewal, and social interaction. In addition to their role in everyday life and social structure, Roman public baths also had a political significance. These establishments were not only places for hygienic procedures, but also important political centers. Meetings, discussions, and even negotiations concerning the affairs and interests of the entire Roman Empire often took place in the baths. Imagine yourself in the center of one of these baths, watching influential Romans, perhaps politicians or military leaders, discard their togas and share the peace and quiet while discussing affairs of state. The bathhouse was a place where people, including emperors, could meet with political allies, negotiate, and decide matters that affected the entire empire. Despite its openness and accessibility to different social classes, the bathhouse provided a social space in which important matters could be discussed quietly and without prying eyes. These political aspects of the Roman baths became especially important under the empire, when Rome, as the center of world politics, was where the most important decisions were made. Emperors or high officials could sometimes use the time in the baths to converse with those in power and discuss everything from military campaigns to domestic security. The baths were also often used for public and private audiences. They offered privacy more easily than the noisy forums or senate houses. To some extent, Roman baths became a symbol of political power. The influence of emperors on the lives of ordinary Romans, their connections and business interests, was often reflected in the way the emperor or senator used public baths for political and social influence. The influence of the baths could be seen in their architecture. Imperial baths were usually distinguished by their particular luxury, as well as their strategic location, often near the most important political and cultural centers of the city. These baths became not only a place for relaxation and purification, but also an element of political demonstration. Public baths in Rome were also venues for public spectacles and entertainment, which also had political elements. For example, emperors could organize grand events, including sports competitions, near the baths. These events served not only to entertain the people, but also to strengthen the political image of the rulers. Thus, the bath became a kind of arena where not only questions of personal hygiene were decided, but also questions of state importance. In addition, for the Romans, the bathhouse was a place where emperors could demonstrate their wealth and concern for the people. Large public baths, which were financed by the state, were a gift to the people, a symbol of the ruler's concern for the welfare of each citizen. These baths also served as meeting places for ambassadors and military leaders, where they could strengthen alliances or discuss military strategies without going out into the public square. So, for Roman politicians, the baths played a vital role. Not only did they maintain physical health and cleanliness, but they also served as a platform for political meetings, social control, and cultural diplomacy. The baths were places where the most important questions were decided, not only about how people would relax or cleanse themselves, but also about how the Roman Empire itself would develop. Roman public baths have left their mark not only in historical documents, but also in archaeological excavations. Over the past few centuries, archaeologists have discovered numerous baths throughout the Roman world, from Rome itself to the far corners of the empire. These finds give us a deeper understanding of how baths functioned and how people lived in them. Imagine walking through a modern archaeological site in Rome. Sand and rocks, ancient walls buried under layers of earth. And then part of a Roman bathhouse opens up before you. You see the remains of mosaics on the floor, columns that once supported majestic ceilings, and even part of a hippocaust system that was used to heat the rooms. The variety and complexity of these archaeological finds is astounding. One of the most amazing features of the Roman baths that archaeologists have been able to discover is the water supply system. The aqueducts that were used to supply water to the baths were an outstanding engineering achievement of the time. These huge canals, built with precision and skill, supplied water to various parts of Rome and neighboring cities. Imagine how the water flowed through these aqueducts, filling the baths and other public spaces of the city. In some places, archaeologists have found remains of ancient pipes and filters, which show how the Romans tried to keep the water relatively clean, even if the system was not perfect. Of particular importance are the finds in places where archaeologists have found the remains of Roman baths. In ancient times, such baths were often huge complexes consisting of various rooms for different temperature procedures, from cold pools to hot steam rooms. Archaeologists study these structures to reconstruct a general idea of what life in a Roman bath was like. One of the key finds is the hippocaust system, a unique heating technology that allowed the floors and walls of the hot rooms to be heated. Archaeologists find parts of these systems, as well as the remains of brick or stone ovens that were used for heating. We can imagine how the hot air passing through these channels filled the rooms with warmth, creating the comfort that was so important to the Romans as they sat in their baths, relaxing after a hard day. But archaeological finds are not only about technology, they are also elements of everyday life for the Romans. When studying baths, archaeologists often find a variety of objects that were used for personal hygiene and body care. For example, fragments of strigils, massage oils, and small vessels that the Romans used for aromatic oils. These finds help us understand how the Romans cared for their bodies and how the cleansing process was important for their health and well-being. Interesting data is also provided by the mosaics that often decorated the floors of baths. These mosaics depicted scenes from everyday life, mythology, or even philosophical ideas. Sometimes these mosaics depicted goddesses and gods, such as the goddess Hygeia, who personified purity and health. These mosaics not only decorated the bathhouse, but also served as a reminder that the bathhouse was a place not only for physical cleansing, but also for spiritual cleansing. When archaeologists explore these sites, they not only reconstruct the past, but also reveal the inner life of the Romans. Through these ruins and finds, we see how people lived, what they thought, and how their daily lives were connected to this extraordinary ritual of purification. Archaeological finds give us a glimpse into the past and see how technology changed, but also how the human need for rest, communication, and care for one's body remained constant. Thus, archaeological excavations of Roman baths not only help us understand how they worked and what happened in them, but also provide a unique window into the daily lives of the Romans. Thanks to these finds, we can imagine how they felt in these magnificent structures, how they took care of their bodies, and how important it was for them to be in this special space. Roman public baths have left an indelible mark on history, not only for their engineering complexity and cultural significance, but also for their legacy that has endured to this day. Many elements of Roman bathing practices and architecture were adopted and adapted by various cultures, and the concept of public baths has continued to exist throughout the centuries, right up to the modern era. Imagine walking through the modern streets of Rome, and suddenly another archaeological discovery unfolds before you, part of the ruined Roman baths. These places, although partly destroyed by time and the onslaught of various civilizations, still continue to affect us with their power and grandeur. Roman baths not only served as models for future public spaces, but also continued to be important cultural and social centers even after the fall of the Roman Empire. Roman baths also inspired the development of European thermal baths in the 19th century, when public baths became part of cultural and social exchange. These baths often became centers of healthcare, where people not only purified themselves, but also healed, relaxed, and enjoyed social interactions. The concept of the spa and modern public baths in Europe and America partly derives from Roman traditions. The principle of public access, ritual purification, and the importance of social life taking place in these spaces remains relevant. However, the Roman legacy is not limited to the architecture or construction of baths. It is also an influence on the very concept of cleanliness and hygiene. Today, when we think about personal hygiene, we often do not even realize how important a part of this process public baths were for the Romans. The Romans were the first to develop a system of public health, where the bath was an important element in maintaining not only physical cleanliness, but also moral health, as evidenced by the philosophical and medical teachings of the time. The legacy of the Roman baths lives on in our cities, and even in our understanding of how to take care of our bodies. When we go to modern spas, Turkish hammams, or simply visit public swimming pools, we continue to operate under the principle that the Romans laid down many centuries ago. Their approach to hygiene, relaxation, and socialization, enshrined in these public spaces, continues to be relevant today. As we conclude this account of the Roman baths, we can see how important this part of culture was for the Roman Empire itself. Not only did it represent achievements in engineering and architecture, but it also became a vital cultural and social center for citizens. Public baths were places where not only physical cleansing and comfort met, but also communication, culture, and a place where not only water was exchanged, but also knowledge, ideas, and social connections. Since the Roman baths became part of our history, they continue to represent the importance of not only the body, but also the spirit. We leave this journey into the world of ancient Rome, but we leave parts of it in our daily interactions with baths and public spaces, where cleanliness, relaxation, and communication remain an important part of human life. Roman public baths were an essential part of daily life for all levels of society, from poor artisans to wealthy politicians. They served not only as places for hygiene, but also as places for socializing, relaxing, and even political discussions. Here's what a day in the Roman baths might have looked like. 6 o'clock in the morning, opening of the baths, and morning arrival. The baths begin their work early in the morning. This is the time when workers and artisans come to begin the day with purification. Many of them use the bath as part of their morning routine to prepare for the working day. After undressing in the apoditerium, they move to the cold pool, frigidarium, to cool off from sleep, then pass through the warm and hot rooms where they undergo basic procedures. 7 to 10 o'clock in the morning, the early morning flow and gradual filling of the baths. The baths begin to fill with middle-class people, merchants, artisans, and some wealthy citizens. This is the time when people come not only for purification, but also for socializing and discussion. Conversations about business or news become common at this time. After the procedures in the caldarium, hot room, they use the strigil to cleanse their skin of sweat and oil. 10 o'clock in the morning, noon, the peak of the baths. At this time, the baths become overcrowded. The higher classes of society come, such as politicians and philosophers. The bath turns into a place for business meetings, discussions, and making deals. People discuss the news and also meet with colleagues and friends. This is also the time for physical exercise in the gyms of the thermae or for walks in the gardens. Noon to 2 p.m., peak time and lunch break. The baths are especially crowded after lunch. People come to relax after work and also to socialize. This is the time when Romans socialize, taking a break from the hustle and bustle of business meetings. They continue to use the hot and cold waters, have oil massages, relax, and have lunch. Second to fifth hour of the day, quiet time and private meetings. After lunch, the number of visitors decreases and the baths become more peaceful. Private meetings, discussions, and intellectual conversations often take place at this time. Wealthy Romans and philosophers may use this time for private conversations or philosophical reflections, while others relax in peace and quiet. Fifth to seventh hour of the evening, evening flow of visitors. After the working day, the bathhouse is filled again with people who come for evening procedures and rest after a hard day's work. This is the time to relax and recuperate before the night. Hot procedures and massages with oils are becoming popular again in the bathhouse. People meet with friends, discuss the latest events, and relax. Seventh to ninth hour in the evening, closing of the baths and evening procedures. The evening in the bathhouse becomes more peaceful. Most people have already left the baths, and only those who come to complete the evening procedures remain. This is the time to relax and prepare for a night's rest. After the last relaxing bath, people leave the bathhouse, and the space begins to prepare for the next day. 9 o'clock in the evening, closing. The baths are closed, and the cleaning begins. At this time, all the rooms are cleaned and prepared for the next day, so that in the morning they will be filled again with Romans, ready for new procedures and meetings. One of the key aspects of the Roman bath that was closely linked to medicine was the use of water at different temperatures. The Romans developed a unique system of baths that included cold, warm, and hot pools, as well as steam rooms. These differences in temperature were used to treat various ailments and to prevent illness. Hot baths, the caldarium, hot room, helped to relax muscles and improve blood circulation. The Romans believed that hot treatments accelerated metabolism, eliminated toxins, and increased blood circulation. These baths were used for general relaxation, as well as to treat muscle pain, joint problems, and chronic fatigue. Cold baths in the frigidarium, cold room, they stimulated blood circulation and served as a preventative measure against colds. Many Romans used cold procedures after hot ones to refresh themselves and improve the condition of their skin, as well as to harden the body. Warm baths in the tepidarium, which was located between the hot and cold rooms. They facilitated the gradual transition of the body from high temperatures to lower ones, maintaining the normal functioning of the body. Roman baths often provided various medical procedures aimed at improving health and treating diseases. These could be simple manipulations or more complex medical procedures performed by doctors directly in the baths. Massage was one of the most popular medical procedures in the baths. The Romans used aromatic oils and herbs for massage, which helped to relax muscles, improve blood circulation, and restore after physical exertion. Massage was also effective for joint and muscle pain, helping to relieve tension and fatigue. Skin care was also an important part of the healing practice in the baths. The Romans used a strigil, a metal scraper, to remove dirt, sweat, and excess oil from the skin. This procedure helped not only to cleanse the skin, but also to improve its condition by removing dead skin cells and stimulating blood circulation. Aromatherapy using various essential oils and herbs, such as laurel, olive, or peppermint oil, also played a major role in healing. These oils were used for massages as well as steam treatments, creating a healthy atmosphere that helped relieve stress and improve mood. Although the Romans had no knowledge of germs and infections, they still conducted medical experiments in the baths. Some Roman doctors used the baths to perform therapeutic procedures aimed at treating diseases. For example, Galen, the famous Roman physician, advocated the use of water to treat various ailments such as ulcers, inflammation, and respiratory diseases. He believed that water, combined with massage and the right temperature, helped restore balance to the body. The Roman baths also provided rehabilitation treatments for soldiers returning from battlefields. They were treated with hot baths and massages to restore strength, relieve fatigue, and speed up the healing of wounds. Baths in Rome also played an important role in disease prevention. The Romans believed that regular visits to the baths maintained health and prevented the development of many diseases. Bath procedures strengthened the immune system, improved metabolism, and helped cleanse the body. In addition, baths were used as places for social gatherings, which also had a positive effect on psychological health. Discussing political and cultural issues in an atmosphere of relaxation and rest helped reduce stress and improve psycho-emotional state. Roman baths were not just places to cleanse the body, but also an important element in the health and medical system of ancient Rome. Not only did they provide Romans with an opportunity for relaxation and social interaction, but they also served as centers for treating various diseases, maintaining physical health, and taking preventative care of the body. The Romans made great strides in the development of medical practices, and the bath became an integral part of this practice, leaving a legacy that continues to influence modern ideas about health and wellness. Although Roman public baths are primarily associated with hygiene, relaxation, and social gatherings, they also played an important role in the religious life of the Romans. In ancient Rome, water and body cleansing were considered not only a physical necessity, but also a spiritual process. The bath could serve as a place for rituals of purification and preparation for religious rites, making it an important element in the cultic practice of the Romans. For the Romans, water was a symbol of life and purification. Water was considered an important element not only for physical health, but also for the purification of the soul. Purification through water was associated with a number of religious practices. The bathhouse, as a place where people were physically purified, was also perceived as a space for symbolic purification before entering into religious rituals. This purification of body and spirit was an important aspect of preparation for participation in sacrifices or other sacred acts. The Romans believed that before performing an important religious act, such as making a sacrifice to the gods or participating in ceremonies, it was necessary to undergo ritual purification. Often this purification involved visiting a bathhouse, where a person could cleanse themselves and focus on their spiritual purity. Water in this context symbolized not only physical purification, but also the cleansing of the soul from sins or unwholesome thoughts. Some Roman baths were used for religious rituals involving purification. One such ritual was the process called latria, a purification before a sacrament or sacrifice. Although the Romans generally used sanctuaries or temples for this purpose, in some cases a bathhouse may have served a similar purpose. Roman emperors also used baths to demonstrate their piety and connection with the gods. For example, an emperor might perform ritual purifications before important state events or holidays. In Roman culture, such actions were always an important part of political life, where the emperor, as a religious leader, had to demonstrate his piety and connection with the gods. In some cases, Roman baths may have been built near temples or sanctuaries, and visiting the bath was part of the preparation for religious rites. For example, on certain days people might visit the bath to purify themselves before going to a religious celebration or sacrifice. The Romans paid special attention to the connection of water with the gods. Water was associated with divine powers such as Neptune, god of the seas and waters, or Vespasian, god of water supply and aqueducts. They were considered patrons of all water resources and were associated with purification and healing. Water rituals were not only a necessity, but also an element of worship of these gods. Some Roman baths may have had statues or altars dedicated to these gods, and the purification process may have involved libations or other symbolic acts of worship. For example, Romans may have made offerings to the water gods before entering the baths, believing that this would bring them good luck and health. In addition, Roman schools of philosophy often considered purification an important element of spiritual development. For the Stoics and Epicureans, purification of the body through the bath was an integral part of the process of self-improvement. These philosophical teachings emphasized the importance of control over the body and spirit, and the bath served as one of the ways to achieve harmony. In this context, the bath became a place not only for physical purification, but also for moral purification, which was part of the general practice of spiritual discipline. Several religious holidays in ancient Rome included visits to the baths as an important part of the rituals. For example, during the holiday of the Terminalia, dedicated to the god of borders and boundaries, the Romans could perform ritual purifications to bless the new year. The bath became part of these rituals, which showed its importance as a symbol of renewal and purification in the life of every Roman. In Roman culture, there were also holidays where women and men would visit the baths to undergo purification before family or social celebrations. In these cases, the bath served not only as a physical, but also as a moral preparation for important events in life. Roman public baths were an important part of Roman life, and their role in religious life was significant. The bath served as a place not only for the purification of the body, but also for the preparation of the soul for important religious rites. People came here not only for physical purification, but also for spiritual renewal, which underlines the depth of the Roman attitude to water as a symbol of life and purification. In this sense, Roman baths were not only a cultural and social space, but also a sacred place for rituals of purification and preparation for religious practices. In Roman culture, there were certain restrictions regarding the public presence of women in places such as baths. Women, especially those from the upper classes, were often restricted to visiting special baths reserved exclusively for women. This was due to norms of modesty and social morality, where women could not publicly display their bodies or be in the same room with men in the nude. Special baths for women. For women, there were separate public baths or women's sections in large baths that were intended only for the fairer sex. These baths could be either separate or part of larger baths that were separated by gender. The division of space ensured, on the one hand, privacy and compliance with moral standards, and on the other, it allowed women to enjoy all the benefits of the Roman baths. Privacy and modesty. Roman culture valued privacy and modesty, especially among women. This was also a reflection of Roman patriarchal society, in which public spaces were often segregated by gender. Women used baths as an opportunity for personal hygiene and grooming, as well as for relaxation and socializing, but always with a certain distance and boundaries. Women from different social classes used the baths differently. For wealthy women of Roman citizens, visiting the baths was not only a matter of hygiene, but also an important element of social communication. At this time, Roman ladies could meet other women, discuss news, share information, and simply spend time with friends. Women from the upper classes often visited the more luxurious baths, which offered more private conditions for relaxation and purification. These baths often had additional amenities such as massage and aromatherapy treatments, special beauty and medicinal baths, where they could meet friends, spend time with family, or organize private meetings. Women from lower social classes, such as artisans, tradeswomen, or farmers, used public baths as a means of maintaining personal hygiene and cleansing, often without access to luxurious baths. However, for these women, baths also played an important role in social life, allowing them to exchange news and maintain connections with other women. In addition to the practical function of cleansing, Roman baths served an important social role for women. They were places where women could free themselves from everyday worries and devote time to themselves, spend the day with friends or relatives. Public baths were a space where one could relax and unwind in a pleasant atmosphere. The bathhouse was an important social center. Women used this time to communicate and exchange news, discuss family matters, political rumors, and other issues important to them. Such meetings in the bathhouse became an important source of information and a way to maintain connections with other women. The bathhouse was also a place for gatherings that had cultural significance. Some bathhouses hosted public events, such as festivals or religious rituals, which were accessible to women. Certain rituals of purification or worship of the gods, such as dedication to a temple or preparation for a festival, could also take place in the baths. For women, visiting the Roman baths was also an important moment for self-care. Roman women paid attention not only to physical cleansing, but also to cosmetic procedures. Women used a variety of oils and scrubs to care for their skin. They would apply oils to their skin to moisturize and protect it from external influences, and would use strigil to remove sweat and oil, often followed by applying scented oils to improve the smell and texture of their skin. Women also enjoyed massages using aromatic oils to help them relax, improve circulation, and combat physical ailments. Visiting a bathhouse was not only a physical cleansing, but also a symbolic act. Women, like men, believed in cleansing the soul through cleansing the body. And for them, it was an important ritual before religious ceremonies or other significant events in life. Despite the limited space for women and the peculiarities of the social structure, Roman baths played an important role in the lives of women in ancient Rome. They were not only a place for hygienic procedures, but also a social and cultural center where women could communicate, maintain connections, and take care of themselves. Through these customs and rituals, Roman women continued to maintain their physical and spiritual harmony, using the baths as a place for rest and renewal. The Roman baths, like many other aspects of life in ancient Rome, were staffed not only by local Romans, but also by many people from conquered territories and from different parts of the empire. Rome was a multinational empire, and many of the bath workers came from other cultures. These people played a key role in the functioning of the baths, and their presence is an important aspect that helps us understand how the Roman Empire integrated different peoples and cultures. Slavery was an integral part of Roman society, and slaves made up a significant portion of the staff in the public baths. Many of these slaves came from conquered territories such as Gaul, Spain, Egypt, Greece, and even from more distant provinces such as Asia and Africa. Conquered peoples as suppliers of slaves. With Rome's victories on various fronts, the number of slaves steadily increased. Slaves were often captured during military campaigns and sent to various parts of the empire, including Rome, where they worked in baths, markets, aristocratic homes, and other public places. Duties of slaves in baths. Slaves working in baths performed a variety of duties. They helped visitors undress and put on special clothes, brought oils for massage, monitored the cleanliness and order of the bath, and maintained the heating system. Some slaves could work in more specialized positions, for example, as masseurs, or assistants to doctors who used the baths for medical treatments. The influence of slaves on culture and habits. Slavery also led to cultural exchange, and many slaves from other cultures brought their knowledge and skills. For example, in the baths, one could find Greek slaves who were trained in philosophy, medicine, or the art of massage. In some cases, slaves not only performed physical work, but also became valuable teachers, teaching the Romans the art of massage or healing. A special place among the workers of the Roman baths was occupied by people who came from the East, especially from Egypt and Asia Minor, as well as African slaves who came from Numidia or other parts of North Africa. Egyptians. Egypt was one of the important provincial centers of the Roman Empire, and many Egyptians, both slaves and free people, worked in the Roman baths. Egyptians were known for their knowledge of medicine, cosmetics, and aromatherapy, which made them indispensable in the baths. They could act as masseurs, cosmetologists, and even medical workers, helping with the treatment of skin diseases and other ailments with oils and herbs. Africans. Workers from Africa, particularly Numidia, were also often employed in the Roman baths. Africans were known for their strength and endurance, making them well suited for heavy work, such as cleaning, heating, and working in hot pools. Persians and other Eastern peoples. Eastern peoples such as the Persians and Malians also influenced Roman culture. Roman baths may have been staffed by people from these cultures, bringing their unique practices to massage and treatment, as well as architectural and decorative elements. The Greeks, like the Egyptians, played a key role in Roman culture and had a significant influence on medical and beauty practices associated with baths. Many Greeks in Rome practiced medicine, philosophy, and worked as massage therapists and doctors. Massage and cosmetology. Greek slaves, and often highly educated, were involved in massage, treatment with aromatic oils, and various therapeutic procedures. From Greece, many methods of treatment through physical action on the body came to Rome, such as gymnastics and massage, which were used in Roman baths for health. Medical knowledge. The Greeks were the main bearers of medical knowledge in ancient Rome. Many doctors in the Roman baths were Greek, and their medical practices based on Greek medicine left a noticeable mark on Roman culture. This included recommendations on diet, treatment of skin diseases, and the use of various baths. In addition to slaves, bathhouses could also employ immigrants from other parts of the Roman Empire, such as Franks, Germans, and other peoples who sought work in Rome. These people could hold more privileged positions, such as bathhouse owners, managers, or medical specialists. Managers and administrators. Larger baths could also employ managers and administrators, often from other parts of the empire. They were responsible for coordinating the work of the baths, ensuring order, and monitoring the services provided to visitors. Although most bathhouse workers were slaves, some could eventually gain their freedom or rise in social status through their skills. For example, slaves who were well trained in medicine or massage could gain their freedom and then continue to work in the baths as free specialists. Traders and small entrepreneurs. Thermoi workers, such as masseurs or beauticians, could also earn money by providing additional services, allowing them to create small entrepreneurial networks and sometimes make a living outside of traditional slavery. Roman baths were thus a place where different cultures met, and workers from other nations and social classes played a key role in their functioning. These people, often from conquered territories, not only kept the baths going, but also introduced new ideas and practices that influenced Rome's medical and cultural traditions. In the history of the Roman Empire, some of the most ambitious and significant architectural projects were the thermae, grand public baths that served not only for purification, but also for cultural, social, and political purposes. One of the most striking examples of such structures were the baths of Caracalla, which left an indelible mark on Roman architecture and culture. These baths were built during the reign of Emperor Caracalla, who, although famous for the cruelty and political instability of his reign, sought to leave behind a legacy that would strengthen his popularity among the people. Imagine how, in the early years of the 3rd century, amid a multitude of political crises and threats, Caracalla decided to create something grandiose, a project that would be not only an architectural marvel, but also a symbol of his concern for the people. His decision to build one of the largest and most luxurious baths in Rome was not just an act of architectural ambition, but also a political strategy. When you picture the majestic baths of Caracalla, you must understand that this was not just a building for ablutions. It was a large structure that symbolized the emperor's concern for the people. Caracalla, who began ruling in 211, sought to strengthen his power in Rome after the painful loss of his brother, which caused discontent and suspicion among the people. The construction of the baths became a kind of propaganda, an attempt to strengthen his popularity, especially among ordinary Romans. As often happens in history, large-scale projects such as the baths become not only means for political play, but also cultural signs of the era. The baths of Caracalla were not just a place for cleansing the body, but also an important cultural center where people could meet, discuss news, enjoy social life, and take a break from everyday worries. In this context, the baths served both a cultural and a political purpose. They became a symbol of the benevolence of the emperor, who not only rules but also cares for the health and leisure of his people. Construction of the baths of Caracalla began in 212 and continued until 216. It was a gigantic structure covering an area of 12 hectares, an area that would fit several football pitches. The baths could accommodate up to 1,600 people at a time, but their greatness lay not only in their size, but also in the engineering solutions that were used to build them. The baths of Caracalla are not only huge pools, but also a complex heating system using a hypocaust. Hot air passing through channels under the floors and walls created a comfortable temperature, allowing a pleasant atmosphere to be maintained in a variety of rooms. Each room of the baths had its own special temperature, from a cold pool to a hot steam room. To make the baths function, a gigantic aqueduct was built to supply the baths with water, which was pumped directly into the pools and baths. These aqueducts, engineering marvels of their time, are what gave Rome its famous water supply, which sustained life in such grandiose structures as the baths. The baths of Caracalla were also famous for their interiors. Marble statues, frescoes, and mosaics decorated the walls and floors of the baths. Every detail was thought out to the smallest detail. Images of Roman gods, mythological scenes, as well as images of nature, symbolize the importance of cleansing not only the body, but also the spirit. The water in these baths was considered a sacred element, and the baths themselves as a place for spiritual renewal. For the Romans, thermae were much more than just a bathhouse. They were spaces for socializing and relaxing, for intellectual and social gatherings. In times of political instability, emperors used projects like thermae to demonstrate their generosity and concern for the people, thereby strengthening their power and position in society. The construction of the baths of Caracalla, like other grand projects of the time, served as political propaganda. It was not only a gift to the people, but also a vivid assertion of imperial power. In Roman politics, it was important not only to rule, but also to be seen in the eyes of the people as a caring and generous ruler. The baths became such a symbol, a great and long-lasting monument to the political wisdom of Caracalla. The baths of Caracalla lasted for over 1,000 years, but with the fall of the Roman Empire, earthquakes and looting, their splendor was lost. Today only ruins remain of these baths, but even in this form, they remain an important archaeological and historical monument. The ruins of the baths of Caracalla still attract tourists and scholars. By studying these ruins, archaeologists can reconstruct Roman engineering and understand how Rome's social and cultural practices evolved. Today, the baths of Caracalla have become not only an object of research, but also a venue for cultural events such as concerts and exhibitions. In this context, the baths continue to fulfill their original role as centers of public life. The baths of Caracalla are not just an architectural marvel, but also an important political and cultural project that demonstrated how architecture and public buildings could serve as propaganda and consolidation of power. Caracalla used the construction of these baths to demonstrate his concern for the people, to strengthen his popularity, and to leave a legacy. The baths remain a symbol of Roman architectural power and ambition, and their ruins remind us of the greatness and political wisdom of one of Rome's most controversial emperors. Ancient Rome, with its complex political system, was the site not only of great victories but also of tragedies that to this day represent the most dramatic moments of history. One such event was the death of Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a Roman patrician who became famous after the assassination of Gaius Julius Caesar when he was one of the conspirators. His participation in the conspiracy, as well as the way he met his death, left a vivid mark on Roman history. Imagine how, in those distant days, in early March 44 BC, Rome was experiencing a moment that would become one of the most important milestones in its history, the assassination of Caesar. In the Roman baths, filled with noise and warmth, no one knew that, around the corner, in the darkest corners of politics, tensions were growing that would lead to a terrible tragedy. Gaius Calpurnius Piso was a Roman politician, a member of the patrician Calpurni family, known for their high-profile political activities. He was initially a supporter of Caesar, but later became one of those who joined the conspiracy against him. Piso was a man who could be called honest in the context of Roman politics, but even the best men of the time were caught in the traps of complex political intrigues. Piso was a man with a strong sense of honor and duty, and it was this trait that led him to be among those who dared to oppose Caesar. He was not one of the most outstanding military or statesmen, but his participation in the conspiracy against Caesar played a decisive role in the subsequent disintegration of the Roman Republic. Imagine how, in the dark corners of Rome, amid whispers and secret meetings, a group of conspirators, including such great names as Brutus and Cassius, decided that Caesar, who had become a de facto dictator, was a danger to the Republic. Piso, like many others, was on the side of these conspirators, believing that killing Caesar was the only way to restore the Republic and stop his quest for absolute power. But there were no easy solutions to these conspiracies. Every action, every step could lead to irreparable consequences. And, as often happens in history, the death of one person set off a chain of events that could not be stopped. When Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March 15th, in 44 BC, the event shocked not only Rome, but the entire world. Caesar's death was the moment that forever changed the political map of Rome. But for Gaius Calpurnius Piso, it all began with many questions and uncertainties. He, like many others, experienced this moment with a sense of uncertainty. The conspirators believed they had saved the Roman Republic, but their actions only led to more destruction and chaos. After Caesar's assassination, Piso, like the other conspirators, faced the consequences. The reputation of the conspirators, their purpose and ideals, were soon at risk. Rome entered a period of political instability. Many people in Rome, including former supporters of Caesar, began to seek revenge. After Caesar's assassination, Piso found himself in a very difficult position. The conspirators had expected that by killing Caesar, they would restore the Roman Republic. But in reality, they had plunged Rome into a new cycle of violence and political strife. Rome was in the midst of civil wars, and Piso soon found himself among those under threat. Piso was assassinated in 43 BCE, shortly after the anti-Caesarist forces began to wane. He was executed in one of many political conflicts that would decide the fate of Rome. Piso's death was a result of his involvement in Caesar's assassination, but it was also a symbol of how quickly political circumstances were changing in ancient Rome. Interestingly, it was in the Roman baths that such meetings often took place. In the baths, conspirators could hide from the eyes of the people's wrath or discuss the most important events. The baths were not only a place for relaxation, but also for secret meetings, where people engaged in political intrigue could discuss the future of Rome without attracting unnecessary attention. Piso may have spent time in these public spaces, dealing not only with personal matters, but also with political ones. The baths were places where people in ancient Rome spent a significant amount of time, and key moments in political history often took place there. The story of the death of Gaius Calpurnius Piso reminds us how closely personal ambition and political tragedy are intertwined in the history of Rome. He was one of the conspirators who tried to save the Republic from Caesar, but in the end, he became a victim of his own political game. Roman baths, as social and cultural centers, served as the backdrop for many such events. Not only did meetings and discussions take place here, but decisions were made that ultimately had tragic consequences for those involved. Piso's death is another example of how politics and personal destiny were intertwined in ancient Rome, and Rome itself, with its baths and rituals, became the arena for the most important and darkest events that determined the fate of people and the city itself. Nero, one of Rome's most controversial emperors, left behind not only monuments to his greatness, but also traces of cruelty, excess, and tragedy. His death was the culmination of his despotic rule, and it was at the moment of his downfall, in his final hours, that the Roman baths played an important role. However, despite all the grandeur of the baths, these public baths, symbols of Roman power and prosperity, became witnesses to the tragic fate of the emperor. The Roman Emperor Nero has gone down in history as a figure of excess. His reign, which began in 54 CE, was initially seen as a time of prosperity. However, his despotism, licentiousness, and suspicion soon led to many bloody events. Soon after becoming sole ruler, Nero began eliminating his political opponents, including his mother, his wife, and even philosophers, whom he considered a threat to his power. His most tragic and infamous episode was his behavior during the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, when Nero blamed Christians for setting the city on fire and carried out public executions. Many of his decisions, including building the Golden House on the site of the destroyed neighborhoods, further fueled discontent among the people in the Senate. His personal passions for theater, music, and poetry became the subject of ridicule and criticism, which only worsened his standing with the Roman elite. In 68 CE, the situation in the empire reached a critical point. The legions rebelled against Nero, and his own close associates began to become disillusioned with his rule. After defeats at the front and growing discontent in Rome, Nero found himself isolated, and the Senate declared him an enemy of the people. When Nero realized that his power was inevitably collapsing, he began to seek shelter and try to save his life. He decided to flee and hide, which led him to a place that had previously been used not for salvation, but for relaxation: the Roman baths. Taking refuge in the baths was a symbolic choice. These public baths have always been a place for meetings, relaxation, and social events. For the emperor, known for his extravagant and sometimes immoderate behavior, the baths were a place where he could hide from persecution, escape from political and popular wrath. Why in the thermal baths? In the baths, the emperor could hope to find shelter among the crowds without attracting the attention of guards or praetorians. The bath in Roman culture was not just a place of purification, but also a social arena where friends met, discussions and business conversations took place. However, for Nero, it was only a temporary refuge. But despite the hopes of secrecy, this place proved to be only a fleeting illusion of safety. Nero, fleeing from his enemies, realized in the baths that his last chance for salvation was disappearing. His situation became increasingly desperate. At that moment, when hope for salvation had already faded, Nero made a terrible choice. One of the most tragic and symbolic moments of his death occurred in the last minutes of his life. According to historical sources, Nero met his last hour in the baths. Alone and betrayed by everyone, he decided to commit suicide to avoid a shameful execution. While in this refuge, Nero attempted to commit suicide, but due to excitement and lack of experience, he was unable to carry out his task immediately. He was soon helped by his slave Eutychius, who, according to some sources, took on the difficult role. At the moment of his death, Nero could not help but think about how he was overthrown, how his reign ended in a tragic and shameful death. Interestingly, the noise and bustle that could hardly be an exception in the baths became the contrast that personified the last moments of Nero's life. While life, discussions, and ordinary affairs continued in the baths, the emperor who had once ruled all of Rome died alone. This gave his death additional symbolism. The noise in these baths contrasted with the deafening silence of the dying ruler. The Roman baths were not just centers of social life, but also a metaphor for the entire Roman Empire, a place where everyone met, from aristocrats to ordinary citizens, where conversations about politics, philosophy, life were heard. And now Nero, who was once the center of this great and powerful empire, finds his last refuge in one of these places, in the baths, where he is met not by power, not by glory, but only by silence. The baths were the place where decisive moments in Roman political life once took place, and it was here that one of Rome's most famous and sad emperors ended his career. For Nero, the baths were the place where he experienced his final political and personal tragedy. Imagine one of the majestic bath complexes, filled with the sounds of running water and the scent of oils, hosting noisy contests where the strength, agility, and skill of the Romans became key to their status. And while Roman baths could be places of relaxation, they also served as the arena for active and energetic events that attracted many spectators and participants. In the Roman Empire, physical activity and athletic competitions played an important role in the lives of citizens, especially for those who served in the military or sought physical perfection. Unlike modern sports arenas, Roman baths often included not only bathing areas, but also special gyms and physical training halls. Athletic training in these places became part of Roman culture, along with philosophy, politics, and art. The baths often had special gymnasiums where the Romans could do various types of exercises. These gyms were designed not only to maintain health, but also to strengthen the body. This was especially important for young people who wanted to gain strength and endurance to serve in the army. The Roman baths featured such forms of exercise as wrestling, discus throwing, running, ball training, and more. These sports were used to prepare for military service and were also an important part of Roman leisure and social activities. The Romans believed that maintaining physical fitness was not only beneficial, but also necessary for maintaining health and longevity. Sports competitions in the baths of Rome were not just a way to keep fit, but also an important part of leisure. Both ordinary Romans and aristocrats gathered here to participate in and watch sports tournaments. Unlike today's sporting events, Roman tournaments were often held in the more intimate and personal setting of the baths, adding to the atmosphere of privacy and exclusivity. One of the most popular sports at the baths was wrestling, which, as today, required strength, endurance, and flexibility. Greco-Roman wrestling was probably the favorite form of competition, and it was held both in private baths and in the larger public baths. Gymnastic competitions were also popular, and the Romans took part in them with pleasure, proving their physical fitness. Roman baths could also host discus throwing competitions or ball games reminiscent of modern football. These games attracted large crowds of spectators, and the winners received special respect and recognition. These competitions were held not only in the baths, but also in public halls and sports complexes that were located next to the baths. One of the most important aspects of the thermal sports competitions was that they helped to strengthen social ties. In these places where people from all walks of life gathered, sports tournaments became not just competitions, but also ways to strengthen political and business ties. In the baths, Romans often met each other to discuss news and make deals. Sports competitions provided an excellent opportunity for socializing, where athletes and spectators could not only watch each other's actions, but also exchange opinions, make deals, or discuss important events. In some cases, the winners of sports competitions became heroes among their peers and acquired additional social status. Emperors such as Trajan also supported physical culture and sports competitions that took place in the baths. In some cases, sports tournaments were organized in honor of the emperors or on the day of the festivals dedicated to their reign. This served not only as a way to strengthen imperial power, but also created an atmosphere of celebration and unity among the citizens. It is believed that sports competitions in the thermal baths also served to prevent various diseases and improve health. The Romans were aware of the importance of physical exercise for maintaining general health, and often used the thermal baths to recover from injuries and illnesses. Many sports training sessions in the thermal baths were also connected with water procedures. After intense physical exertion, athletes took cold or hot baths to restore strength and improve blood circulation. These procedures helped not only in recovery after training, but also in preventing possible injuries. The thermal baths also provided massages, which were used to relax muscles and restore energy after physical activity. This was an important element in the recovery and maintenance of athletes' health, as well as a general means of maintaining good physical fitness. Julius Caesar became one of Rome's most prominent and controversial leaders. After winning the Gallic War, he returned to Rome, where his popularity with the army and the people increased significantly. He also took advantage of the situation, consolidating his power and dominating political life. But such ambitions could not help but cause concern among the Roman aristocracy, which continued to consider the republican form of government the only correct way to govern. When Caesar became dictator for life, his power and control began to be felt as a threat to the freedom of Rome. He began to act as an absolute ruler, breaking traditional laws and seizing more and more power. This caused resistance among the elites, including senators, who believed that Caesar was undermining the foundations of the Roman Republic. A group of senators known as the liberals or republicans were unhappy with the concentration of power in the hands of one man. The plot that led to Caesar's murder was carefully planned. Among its participants were Brutus, Cassius, and other influential figures who believed that Caesar had to be eliminated in order to save the Republic. The conspirators met in various places to discuss the details of their mission. Interestingly, while the baths were places for personal meetings, discussing news and making deals, they also became centers for preparing major political decisions. The Roman baths were where the conspirators met, discussed their plans and decisions. This was facilitated by the open atmosphere of the baths, where people could meet in relative privacy, among many other Romans. The conspirators found temporary refuge in the baths, and this symbolized the secrecy of their intentions and isolation from the outside world. The baths, with their noisy atmosphere and the number of people, could be suitable places for discreet meetings. At these moments, when Caesar was at the center of power and his policies were controversial, the baths became the arena for heated discussions that were decisive for the future of Rome. March 15th, 44 BC is a date that will forever remain in history. On the Ides of March, the conspirators acted decisively, and Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Senate, while his attention was focused on discussions with his allies and enemies. On the day of the assassination, Caesar, unaware of the plot, went to the Senate, where the conspirators were waiting for him. Caesar was killed while surrounded by several of his closest associates. At that moment, in the Senate building, the conspirators, inflamed by emotion, attacked him. After Caesar's assassination, the most important events continued to unfold in the baths, although with less drama. After Caesar's death, the country plunged into chaos and civil war, which also affected the life of Rome. The baths continued to be meeting places where politicians and generals discussed their strategies, made alliances, and decided on the new balance of power. But what is interesting is that the baths, places for relaxation and hygiene, became part of a darker side of history. They served not only as a center for relaxation, but also as a center where decisions were sometimes made that could change the fate of Rome. Venus, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, was one of the most revered goddesses in ancient Rome. She personified the ideals of beauty, harmony, and femininity, and her image inspired the Romans to create art, music, philosophy, and architecture. In the myths about Venus, her connection with the baths becomes a symbol of purification, not only of the body, but also of the soul. This myth emphasizes the importance of water as a means of not only physical purification, but also spiritual rebirth. According to the myth, Venus, being the goddess of beauty, always tried to maintain her flawless appearance. She knew that in order to remain beautiful and attractive, it was necessary not only to take care of one's appearance, but also to purify one's body and soul. Water, which in Roman mythology often symbolized purification, harmony, and renewal, played a key role in her rituals. One day, Venus, tired of constantly worrying about her beauty and the duties that other gods had imposed on her, decided to go to the sacred baths. These were not just ordinary Roman baths. They had magical powers that could help even the goddess herself find true harmony and beauty. In the baths, Venus immersed herself in special ablutions, filled with healing herbs and aromas that enhanced her divine power and attractiveness. The water in these baths was said to be magical. It was created by the gods themselves, and its healing power was so great that it could not only cleanse the body, but also restore the balance of the soul. When Venus immersed herself in these waters, her body became even more perfect, and her soul peaceful and harmonious. For Venus, the baths were not just a place of rest, but a sacred space in which spiritual and physical transformation took place. The water, washing away fatigue and stress, symbolized a return to the origins of life and nature, a return to primordial harmony. Venus spent long hours in the baths, allowing the water to cleanse her not only of physical dirt, but also of the experiences that had accumulated over many centuries. In these waters, she found not only the restoration of her beauty, but also peace, tranquility, harmony with the surrounding world. Immersion in water, as a symbol of the purification of the soul, became her spiritual act, filling her with even greater strength and harmony. In myths, thermae are often associated with love, not only as a physical act, but also as a state of inner harmony and peace. For Venus, thermae became a place where she could restore not only her external attractiveness, but also her inner strength, which helped her to be not only the goddess of beauty, but also the goddess of love. Through ablution, she was restored and became ready to inspire people to love and beauty again. Venus, as the goddess of love, always sought to be a source of beauty and harmony. Her presence in the baths was a symbol of the fact that purification is not only a physical process, but also a path to inner perfection. For the Romans, the baths were a place where one could not only cleanse the body, but also achieve spiritual balance. Venus taught the Romans that beauty and harmony do not begin with the exterior, but with the inner state. Purification through the waters of the baths was not only a physical, but also a spiritual process that helped people find peace and joy in their lives. Venus, immersing herself in these waters, reminded everyone that true beauty begins with the inner state of a person, and the baths became a place where this harmony could be found. Water played an important role in Roman culture, as a symbol of purity and renewal. In the myth of Venus, the water that washes her becomes a magical source of eternal beauty and harmony. It was not just a ritual of purification, but also a path to self-knowledge, love for oneself, and the world around us. The myth of Venus and the baths was not simply a story about a goddess of beauty. It was a lesson for the Romans about the importance of caring not only for their bodies, but also for their souls. Venus, with her combination of beauty and love, represented the ideal that every Roman aspired to. The baths in this context became places where physical purification was combined with spiritual rebirth, where people could not only restore their appearance, but also find inner harmony. For the Romans, thermae were not just practical bathing facilities. They were sacred places that offered the opportunity to purify not only the body, but also the soul. The myth of Venus in thermae reminds us that physical beauty, as well as love, require inner purification and harmony. In this myth, thermae become a symbol of the connection between body, spirit, and nature. The myth of Venus and the baths is deeply embedded in Roman culture, emphasizing that the baths were not only places for physical treatments, but also sacred spaces for spiritual purification and self-knowledge. Venus, as a symbol of beauty and love, taught the Romans through her rituals of bathing in the baths the importance of harmony and inner transformation. This myth serves as a reminder that true purification and beauty occur not only at the level of the body, but also at the level of the soul. Medea is one of the most enigmatic and powerful figures in ancient Greek mythology. A priestess, sorceress, and daughter of the king of Colchis, Medea is known for her determination and magical powers, which became decisive in her quest for personal freedom and power. The myth of Medea and her bathing in the baths becomes a metaphor for the purification, rebirth, and transformation that occurs in a person striving for inner harmony and strength. This myth personifies the importance of water as a means of not only physical purification, but also spiritual transformation. Medea, as the daughter of the Colchian king Aetes and a sorceress, was endowed with great magical powers. Her story is filled with tragedy, betrayal, and revenge. In the myths, Medea falls in love with Jason, the hero of the Argonauts, and helps him complete difficult tasks using her magic. Despite her kinship with the ancient gods and kings, she finds herself in mortal danger when her love leads to betrayal. When Jason, for his own good, abandons her, Medea decides to take revenge. Her desire for revenge, however, is not a simple act of rage. It is an expression of a power that comes from within her, a power that she had to cleanse and control. It is in the process of purification and cleansing, as in the myths of many great heroes, that Medea finds the path to her restoration. The myth of Medea and her bathing in the baths symbolizes her inner struggle and desire to cleanse herself of her dark, destructive emotions. While her soul was consumed by revenge and bitterness, she needed to cleanse herself in order to regain her strength and wisdom. After Medea had carried out her act of revenge by killing Jason's children and destroying his happiness, she felt her soul being consumed by darkness. This pain and anger began to destroy her from within. She then decided to purify herself in order to regain her inner harmony. Medea went to the baths, where, immersing herself in the healing waters, she sought to rid herself of her inner pain and destructive feelings. The water in the thermal baths became for Medea not just a cleansing of the body, but also an important ritual of restoring strength and mind. She immersed herself in waters filled with magical power, which could not only cleanse her physically, but also rid her of the bitterness of revenge. The water became a symbol of rebirth, cleansing from all the heavy emotions and destruction that she had experienced. In myths, water often represents magical power that can change fate, purify, and restore. For Medea, the water in the baths became a source of power that allowed her not only to regain her inner harmony, but also to strengthen her magical abilities. Immersion in water symbolized the process of not only physical purification, but also spiritual rebirth, restoration of inner harmony and strength. The water in which Medea washed herself was filled with magical power, helping her to get rid of dark thoughts and emotions. In myths, water often symbolizes the source of new life and purification from the previous destroyed state. Medea, immersing herself in these waters, washed not only her body, but also her soul. She was freed from revenge and anger, and in her heart, the spark of wisdom and magic, which had previously been eclipsed by her passion and grief, was again lit. Medea, like many other mythological heroes, went through a purification process that led to her inner transformation. This process of purification was necessary so that she could become strong and independent again, able to control her magical powers and find the path to a new life. The water in the baths became the key to her restoration and rebirth. The myth of Medea and her bathing in the baths teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes, in order to return to harmony with ourselves, we need to cleanse ourselves of our darkest and most destructive emotions. Medea, like many mythical heroes, went through moments of despair, revenge, and bitterness. But it was through purification and inner transformation that she regained her strength. The water in the baths became a place of not only physical purification, but also spiritual renewal for Medea. She went through her inner torments, cleansing her soul to become who she was meant to be, a great and wise sorceress. This myth symbolizes the process of accepting one's dark sides and overcoming them through willpower and purification. The myth of Medea also reminds us that anyone who has faced personal tragedy can find a path of purification and restoration. Just as Medea used the magical power of water to restore herself, each person can find their own path to inner harmony through self-awareness and acceptance of their pain and emotions. The myth of Medea and the baths is a story of inner struggle, purification, and rebirth. The water used in the baths was not just a physical cleansing for Medea, but also the key to restoring her inner strength and harmony. This myth shows how through cleansing from destructive emotions and thoughts, one can return to the sources of one's strength and wisdom. The water in the baths, as a symbol of life and rebirth, plays an important role in the transformation of the hero. And this myth teaches us that only through purification can one return to one's true nature and restore one's strength.